the man who never left the store. It happened in a small town outside of Dallas, Texas, in the fall of 2011. I was the overnight manager at the local Walmart, one of those massive, half-empty stores that always felt too big for the town. We closed at midnight, and the silence afterward was something I had learned to live with. You could hear the buzz of the lights, the faint hum of the refrigerators, and the creak of the aisles as the building cooled down. It was never completely quiet, but that night, it felt alive in a different way. Around 1:40 a.m., I was checking the stock reports when I heard a shopping cart moving near the garden section. I assumed it was one of my employees, maybe Luis, who often stayed late to organize the plants. But when I called out his name, no one answered. The wheels stopped for a second, then started rolling again, slowly, steadily, as if someone was pushing it. I walked toward the sound, my shoes squeaking on the polished floor. The aisles were dark except for the emergency lights, which gave everything a strange green tint. I turned the corner, and there it was, an empty cart moving by itself. It rolled a few feet, stopped, and bumped softly into the shelf of plastic planters. I told myself it was just the slanted floor, but my heart didn't believe it. The next morning, I checked the camera feed from that section. The timestamp showed 1:43 a.m., a clear image of the cart rolling, turning slightly, then stopping. What made my stomach twist was that a man was walking behind it. He wore an old red jacket with white stripes down the sleeves. His head was lowered, hands gripping the handle. But right before the cart hit the shelf, the man blurred, then vanished completely, frame by frame. I called maintenance to check for glitches. They said the cameras were fine. The footage was normal. But the man. I knew what I'd seen. I showed it to Luis, and his face drained of color. "That's him," he said quietly. "That's the homeless guy. Years ago, before my time, there'd been a man who lived behind the store. He used to sneak in through the loading bay and sleep near the garden center when it got cold. One winter night, he never woke up. They found him with an empty coffee cup beside him, still wearing that same red jacket. I didn't want to believe it, but the activity kept happening. Every few nights, the garden lights flickered. Bags of soil fell over for no reason. We'd find footprints in the dust, bare, human footprints, trailing off toward the storage door. One night, Luis refused to go back there alone. He said he'd heard someone whisper his name from the corner, a low, hoarse voice saying, "I used to work here too." The following week, I decided to stay after hours to see it for myself. I turned off the overhead lights, leaving just the emergency glow. Around 2:10 a.m., I heard the cart again. The slow, rhythmic squeak of the wheels. I stood still, watching the end of the aisle. A shadow moved across the light. Then I saw him, the man in the red jacket, walking like he belonged there. He pushed the cart past me, eyes blank, as if he didn't notice me at all. The air grew colder. I could see my breath. I whispered, "Who are you?" He stopped. Slowly, his head turned halfway toward me, and for a second I thought he would answer. But instead, he just kept walking until he reached the storage door. He vanished before he touched it. The next day, I checked the cameras again. Nothing. Just me standing there, frozen in an empty aisle, talking to no one. After that night, strange things escalated. Automatic doors opened when no one was near. The intercom clicked on by itself, releasing a faint static hiss, like someone trying to speak but couldn't. The night crew started quitting, one after another. They said they couldn't handle the feeling that someone was always behind them. One morning, I came in early and found a cart parked by the employee lockers. Inside it was an old, faded red jacket. The same one from the footage. I knew it wasn't there the night before, I had locked that area myself. I decided to call corporate and report a vandalism issue, but before I could, one of the janitors came to me holding something. It was a small, yellowed ID badge. The name on it was Ray M., and the photo showed the same man from the footage. On the back, there was a date, 1998. Our store didn't even exist then. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of the man pushing the cart played over and over in my mind. He wasn't angry. He didn't look lost. He looked like someone who had simply never stopped working, like the store had become the only home he'd ever known. A few days later, I found the courage to do something strange. I took that red jacket and placed it near the garden section, where the cameras had caught him. I left a cup of coffee beside it and whispered, "You can rest now." The next night was the first in months with no noise, no flickering lights, no cold air. Everything felt still, peaceful, almost heavy with silence. Even Luis noticed. "It's over," he said quietly, as if afraid to say it too loud. It's been years since then. The store still stands. New employees have come and gone, and no one mentions anything strange anymore. But sometimes, when I walk through the garden aisle at closing, I still glance at that corner, half expecting to see a red jacket disappear into the shadows. The end. Aisle 17 lights. It happened in Topeka, Kansas, in February 2018. I was working as a night security guard at the Walmart off Highway 24. It wasn't a big store, but it was open 24 hours, and the night shifts were mostly empty except for a few truckers or people grabbing groceries on their way home from work. My partner, Eric, and I were the only guards on duty that night. We'd done the same routine for years: check the exits, walk the aisles, make sure no one was hiding in the bathrooms. Nothing ever happened. Until that winter. Around 3 a.m., Eric started talking about something odd he'd noticed over the last few nights. Every night, at exactly 3:12 a.m., the lights in aisle 17, the cleaning supplies section, would flicker 3 times, go dark for a few seconds, then come back on. Always the same aisle. Always the same minute. We laughed about it, blaming bad wiring, but when he showed me his phone, he had videos. The flickering looked unnatural, too rhythmic, too deliberate. That night, as the clock ticked toward 3:12, I decided to check it out myself. The cameras were clear. No movement, no shadows. Just shelves stacked with mops and bleach bottles. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the empty air. I stood near the end of the aisle, staring at the lights above, waiting. When 3:12 hit, the flickering began, 3 short blinks, then black. For 4 seconds, the entire aisle was swallowed in silence and darkness. Then the lights came back on. But there was something else. A shopping basket lay in the middle of the aisle that hadn't been there before. A blue Walmart basket, the kind we kept stacked near the entrance. It looked placed. I radioed Eric, asked if he was nearby. He said he was in the back near the loading dock. The cameras confirmed it. No one else was inside. The next morning, I checked the security feed. My heart sank. The video showed the lights flickering, but during the few seconds of darkness, the feed didn't cut to black. The infrared mode stayed on, and it caught something standing at the far end of the aisle. A figure. Pale, motionless. When the lights came back, it was gone. I told the store manager, a woman named Denise. She looked uncomfortable, said the cameras sometimes distort reflections. But when I showed her the still image, her expression changed. "That's strange," she whispered. "It looks like Tom." I asked who Tom was. She hesitated, then told me. Tom had been a night stalker 2 years before. He'd died in a car crash, on his way home from a night shift. His car slid off the icy road at around 3:12 a.m. After that, I couldn't get the image out of my mind. I started dreading that time each night. Still, I kept working. We all needed the money, and Walmart doesn't close. 3 nights later, I was watching the monitors alone. Eric had called in sick. It was quiet except for the hum of the freezers. When 3:12 came, the lights in aisle 17 began their usual flicker. I leaned toward the screen, and froze. The camera feed wasn't just showing the lights this time. The same figure stood at the end of the aisle again, but now it was moving. Slowly walking toward the camera. The picture glitched for half a second, then stabilized. The man's face was pale and blank, his eyes like black hollows. He stopped right under the camera, looking up at it. Then the feed cut out. I ran to the aisle with my flashlight. My breath echoed in the stillness. Everything was where it should be, except the same blue basket was sitting in the middle of the floor again. I picked it up, turned it over. On the bottom, someone had written a name in marker, Tom. That was enough for me. I left the basket where it was and went back to the security office. The lights flickered once more, but this time, the flicker spread, aisle after aisle, like a wave rushing through the store. Then everything went dark. The power was out. I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the far end of the building. My flashlight caught glimpses of signs swaying slightly as if brushed by wind. But there was no wind. When the power returned a few minutes later, the store was empty. The cameras came back online, and I rewound the feed. Every aisle was visible, except aisle 17. That one showed only static. The system had recorded nothing between 3:12 and 3:16. 4 missing minutes. The next morning, I told Denise I was quitting. She didn't argue. She just nodded, like she already knew I wouldn't stay. Before I left, she said quietly, "You know, after Tom died, his mother came here. She said he always took the 3 o'clock break to call her, right before his shift ended. But the night he died, she didn't get a call. She said she woke up at 3:12 and saw her phone light up once, but no one was there. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Eric. He'd gone back to work. He said things were normal, until the power went out again the night before. He went to check aisle 17 and found a phone lying on the floor, screen cracked, battery dead. The wallpaper showed a picture of a man in a Walmart vest. It was Tom. That was the last time I ever heard from Eric. I tried calling him a few days later, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The manager told me he didn't show up for work after that night. A few months later, I stopped by that Walmart during the day, just to see if it was all still there. Aisle 17 was open, bright, and full of cleaning supplies. A few new employees were restocking shelves, laughing, completely unaware. But as I walked past, I noticed the overhead light flicker once. Then twice. Then a third time. The air grew cold for just a moment. No one else seemed to notice. But when I turned back toward the aisle, I could have sworn I saw someone standing at the far end, near the mops, wearing a blue vest and a faint smile. The end. The woman by the freezers. It happened in Jacksonville, Florida, in the summer of 2015. I was a cashier at the Walmart on Atlantic Boulevard, working the late shift that ended around midnight. The store was always freezing cold at night, and the aisles near the back, the freezer section, were even worse. That hum from the compressors never stopped, a deep, vibrating sound that seemed to live inside your ears. It was a quiet Tuesday, almost closing time. Only a few customers wandered around, most of them half asleep. My friend Tanya, who worked the registers beside me, was counting her till when she suddenly looked up and frowned. "Did you see her?" she whispered. I asked who she meant. She nodded toward the frozen section, eyes wide. "The old woman in the nightgown. She's been standing there for 10 minutes, just staring at the doors." I turned to look. From my angle, I could see her, thin, pale, gray hair falling down her shoulders. She was wearing a light blue nightgown, bare feet on the cold tile. The way she stood made my skin crawl, completely still, head slightly tilted, lips moving like she was whispering to herself. I asked Tanya if we should call security, but before we did, the woman started walking, slowly, unsteadily, toward the end of the aisle. I grabbed my phone and started recording. As she reached the far corner, the lights above her flickered. Just once. When they came back on, she was gone. We both stood there staring. The aisle was empty. There was no sound except the low hum of the freezers. I walked over, expecting maybe she'd fallen or turned into another aisle, but there was no one. I checked behind the display cases, even opened the employee door to the back. Nothing. The next morning, I told our night manager, Carl. He laughed at first, said we'd probably seen a reflection or someone who'd left before we noticed. But when I showed him the short video clip, his face went pale. "Delete that," he said quietly. "Don't keep it." I didn't understand why, but I did as he asked. Later that day, Tanya told me she'd asked around. One of the older employees, Sandra, told her that about 3 years earlier, there had been an accident near the store. A woman in her 60s had been hit by a car while crossing the parking lot late at night. She had wandered out in her nightgown, confused, trying to find her son. He'd worked at that same Walmart. The woman had died before the ambulance arrived. After hearing that, we both started to avoid the freezer aisle. But strange things kept happening there. Sometimes, the doors to the frozen food cases would open slightly on their own, one by one, as if someone was walking past and touching each handle. Sometimes the motion sensors would pick up movement after the store was closed. And once, the overhead speaker system turned on by itself at 2 a.m., broadcasting nothing but the faint sound of a woman's voice whispering names. About a week later, I was doing cleanup duty after closing. Everyone else had gone home except for me and Carl. I was mopping the tile near the back when I felt a sudden drop in temperature, like stepping into a freezer without realizing it. My breath came out in white clouds. The freezers were humming louder than usual, almost like they were groaning. Then, from the reflection on the glass, I saw her again. The same woman. She was standing directly behind me, eyes fixed on the freezer doors. I froze. My hands started shaking so bad I dropped the mop. I didn't dare turn around. Through the reflection, I could see her mouth moving again, whispering something over and over. I forced myself to turn. But the aisle was empty. I ran to find Carl. He was in the office watching the monitors. When I told him what I saw, he didn't seem surprised. He just sighed and said, "She comes back sometimes. I've seen her too." He told me he'd worked there for almost 10 years, and every few months, someone would report the same thing, a barefoot woman in a blue nightgown standing near the freezer aisle, whispering names. Once, a stalker claimed she said his name out loud before vanishing. Carl said that's why he never let anyone work alone in that section anymore. The next night, we decided to review the camera footage from the time I'd seen her. The angle showed the entire frozen section. At first, it looked empty. Then, right at 11:56 p.m., the lights flickered, and there she was. Clear as day. A woman standing in front of the freezer doors, one hand pressed against the glass. Her face was turned slightly toward the camera, and though the image was grainy, you could see her eyes, wide, hollow, unblinking. Then, a second later, she faded away, like smoke dissolving into the air. Carl copied the footage to a USB drive, but when we tried to play it later, the file was corrupted. Every time we opened it, the screen froze at the exact frame where her hand touched the glass. After that, things only got worse. One night, a new employee named Marcus was restocking frozen pizzas when he screamed. We ran to him. The freezer door had fogged up completely, and on the glass, written in the frost, were 2 words, "Help him." Marcus swore he hadn't written it. The next morning, we found out that a former employee, her son, had died in an accident 2 days earlier. He'd worked there years ago, before transferring to another store. His name was Jeremy. That was when it all made sense. She wasn't haunting the store because she was lost. She was looking for him. She had come back, confused, still searching for her son who would never answer her again. We told management everything, and for a while, the freezer section was closed for maintenance. When it reopened, the strange events stopped. The air felt warmer again. The lights stopped flickering. But no one stayed there alone anymore, not after dark. Sometimes, when I walk past those freezers during a late shift, I still glance at the reflections on the glass. Most nights, it's just me staring back. But once in a while, when the hum of the compressors deepens and the air grows cold, I think I see another shape standing just behind me, a faint blur of blue, motionless, watching the doors. The end. The cart that followed me. It happened in Roanoke, Virginia, in October 2019. I had stopped by Walmart late at night after work. It was around 11:30 p.m., one of those quiet nights when the air feels heavy and still. The parking lot was almost empty, except for a few cars near the entrance and a scattered line of shopping carts left behind by customers. I just needed cat food and some cleaning supplies. Nothing unusual. Inside, the store was half-lit. The intercom played a soft, static-filled melody that made the silence worse. Only 2 cashiers were left. One of them looked half asleep. The night felt too quiet for a place that big. I walked through the aisles quickly, filling my basket. I remember the exact feeling, cold air from the vents, the squeak of my shoes on the floor, and that sense that someone else was there, even though no one was visible. When I reached the pet section, I noticed a shopping cart sitting by itself at the end of the aisle. It wasn't near anyone, just there, facing my direction. It had a few dents, a broken wheel, and a faint squeak when it moved, like the sound of metal grinding. I didn't think much of it. I grabbed a bag of cat food and started walking toward the checkout. Then I heard it, the squeak of that same wheel behind me. Slow, rhythmic, following my pace. I turned. The cart was rolling in my direction, not fast, not random, steady. There was no one behind it. It stopped when I stopped. I looked around for anyone nearby. The aisles were empty. I pushed my basket onto the counter, trying to ignore it. But when I looked up, I could see the reflection in the front doors. The cart had stopped right behind me. The cashier noticed it too. She frowned and asked, "Is that yours?" I shook my head. She laughed nervously, saying, "These wheels move on their own sometimes." But her eyes stayed fixed on it. I paid and left quickly, clutching my receipt. The automatic doors opened with a hiss, and the humid Virginia air hit me. I walked fast toward my car, parked a few rows away. The lights in the lot flickered, buzzing faintly. When I turned to return the basket, the car was right behind me again, only a few feet away from the doors. I hadn't heard it move. I stopped. It stopped. My heart started pounding. There was no wind that night. I got into my car fast, started the engine, and reversed out of the space. In the rearview mirror, I saw it again. The car rolled forward slightly, then stopped dead center in the lane, facing me. When I got home, I was still uneasy. I told myself it was just my imagination, or maybe the slant of the floor outside the store. But when I woke up the next morning, my car's windshield was fogged from the inside. Someone, or something, had drawn a small handprint on the glass. Not an adult's. A child's. I don't have kids. I tried to shake it off. But strange things kept happening. 2 nights later, I was driving past the same Walmart around midnight. The store was closed. The parking lot was nearly empty. And in the faint glow of the streetlights, I saw a single shopping cart sitting in the same spot where I'd parked before. Facing the road. The next day, I told my coworker about it. She used to work at that same Walmart years ago. When I described the cart, the dented frame, the broken wheel, she went pale. "That sounds like the one from the parking lot accident," she said quietly. Back in 2005, a little girl had been killed there. Her mother had left her in a cart for just a second while loading groceries. The cart rolled down the slope, hit a car, and tipped over. The girl's head struck the pavement. She died before paramedics arrived. Since then, employees said weird things happened around closing time, especially with carts. They'd move on their own, disappear, or roll across the lot with no wind. I didn't believe in that kind of thing. But then something happened that changed my mind completely. A week later, I went back to the store in the early evening. It was still light outside. I told myself I'd been imagining things, that it would all look normal in daylight. When I left, the sun was setting. The lot glowed orange, and the shadows stretched long. As I pushed my cart toward the return area, another one broke loose from the line, just one, and started rolling toward me. It came straight, slow, controlled. I let go of mine. Both stopped, facing each other. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. I glanced down. The screen lit up with a text from an unknown number. It said, "I'm still here." My stomach turned cold. I looked around, but there was no one nearby. I deleted the message instantly, thinking it had to be a prank. But later that night, when I got home, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The same handprint, small, childlike, was back on my windshield. This time, there were two. I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I drove back to Walmart, just to prove to myself it was over. The parking lot was empty again. The lights flickered slightly, buzzing like flies. And there, near the main entrance, stood a single shopping cart. The same dent. The same broken wheel. Facing the road. I got out of the car and walked toward it. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The closer I got, the colder the air felt. My breath turned white. I stopped a few feet away. The cart shifted once, like someone had touched it. Then it rolled forward, softly bumping against my leg. That was enough. I ran back to the car and left. I never returned to that Walmart again. But a few weeks later, something arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside the envelope was a small piece of receipt paper, old and faded. It was blank, except for a faint, greasy handprint near the corner, small, round, child-sized. I burned it that night. Even now, whenever I walk past a Walmart, I can't help but glance at the carts lined up outside. Most people see metal frames and rubber wheels. But every now and then, when the night air is still and the parking lot lights flicker, I see one cart start to move on its own. Slowly. Quietly. Following someone who doesn't yet realize they're being followed. The end. Employee Door 3. It happened in Duluth, Minnesota, in March 2020. I had just started working at the Walmart on Maple Grove Road. It was my first job after moving back from college, and I was desperate to make some money. The building was older, with long, narrow hallways behind the sales floor that led to storage rooms and employee areas. During the day, it looked normal enough. But at night, when the customers were gone and only the hum of the refrigerators filled the air, it felt different, too quiet, too cold, and too still. My first week went smoothly until the night shift manager, Ron, asked me to take the trash to the back. He handed me a small silver key and said, "Use door 3. It leads right to the compactor." I nodded and walked down the employee corridor. The hallway lights buzzed weakly, and half the bulbs flickered. I remember counting the doors as I passed them. Door 1 led to the break room, door 2 to maintenance. Then came door 3. It was unmarked, except for a small plastic sign that said authorized personnel only. The handle was cold to the touch, colder than metal should have been indoors. I slid the key in, turned it, and pulled. The door creaked open, releasing a gust of air that smelled faintly like wet concrete and rust. Behind it wasn't the compactor area I expected. Instead, there was a narrow corridor stretching into darkness, lit by a single flickering light far ahead. The walls were bare cement, the floor uneven. I took one step inside and heard what sounded like a faint echo, footsteps that didn't belong to me. I froze. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I should have turned back right there. But curiosity won. I walked a few more steps, the sound of my shoes echoing against the walls. The air felt heavier the deeper I went, like being underground. The corridor seemed to go on forever, but I could still see the dim outline of the door behind me. I figured maybe it connected to another section of storage. Then, about 20 feet in, the light flickered once and went out. Everything went black. I spun around, heart racing, and ran back toward the entrance, but it was gone. The wall was solid concrete. No door. No frame. Just gray stone where the door had been seconds ago. I pounded on the wall, shouting for help. My voice echoed endlessly down the corridor. I don't know how long I stood there, But after a while, I heard it again, footsteps, slow and dragging, coming from the darkness ahead. I backed up, fumbling for my phone. No signal. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it forward. The beam barely caught through the dark, but for a brief moment, I saw something move. A figure. It was a man wearing a faded blue Walmart vest. His head hung low, face shadowed. He was walking slowly toward me, one hand brushing the wall. I shouted at him, asking who he was, but he didn't respond. When I took a step back, he stopped. His head lifted slightly, and I saw his face, pale, hollow, and sunken, like he hadn't slept or eaten in weeks. Then his mouth twitched, and he whispered, "You're not supposed to be here." The flashlight flickered. I turned to run again, and this time the door was back. I threw myself through it, slamming it shut behind me. The hallway outside was bright again, the hum of the store returning like a heartbeat I hadn't realized I'd lost. I dropped the key on the floor and ran to find Ron. When I told him what happened, he went pale. "Door 3, he repeated, staring at me. Then he sighed and said quietly, "That door doesn't exist anymore. It's been sealed for years." I thought he was joking until he led me back down the hallway. The spot where I'd entered was nothing but solid drywall, no handle, no frame, nothing. I told him exactly what I'd seen, but he just shook his head. That area used to lead to an old supply tunnel. A worker died down there when the building flooded during construction. They closed it off. We don't use that side of the building anymore. That night, I went home and barely slept. The man's voice kept replaying in my head. "You're not supposed to be here." The next day, I came in early to prove to myself I wasn't losing it. When I reached the employee hallway, the lights were all on. The drywall where door 3 had been looked normal. I ran my hand along it, half expecting to feel a seam or a loose panel. Nothing. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye, a faint imprint on the floor. Shoe prints, dusty and old, leading straight into the wall where the door used to be. Later that night, one of the older employees, Sandra, pulled me aside. "Ron told me about your little adventure," she said quietly. "You're not the first to see that door." She told me that over the years, new hires sometimes mentioned it. They'd get lost, open a door that wasn't on any map, and see a long cement hallway. One guy claimed to have heard whispering inside. Another said he'd found a vest hanging on a nail, covered in dust, with a name tag that read Mark H. When I asked if that was the man who'd died, Sandra nodded. He drowned when the tunnel flooded. They never found his body. After that, I refused to work nights alone. Every time I walked past that part of the hallway, I felt it, the cold air seeping through the wall, like the concrete was still breathing. Once, when the power flickered, I could have sworn I saw a faint outline appear, just for a second, a door-shaped shadow where the drywall met the floor. A few months later, I quit. Too many nights I'd hear faint knocking from behind that wall, always 3 times in a row. No one else seemed to hear it. I went back once, about a year later. The store had been renovated, walls freshly painted, the hallway brighter. I stood where door 3 had once been. A maintenance worker passed by and asked if I needed something. I just said I used to work there. He smiled and said, "Oh yeah, the one with the sealed corridor? Weird place. Still cold, though." I didn't reply. I just walked away. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream of that door, gray, unmarked, waiting. And from the darkness behind it, I can hear the slow echo of footsteps, moving closer each time, whispering those same words, "You're not supposed to be here." The end. The receipt that printed itself. It happened in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the winter of 2016. I was the closing cashier at a Walmart near Lomas Boulevard. It was the kind of shift that dragged forever, fluorescent lights humming above, cleaning machines echoing in the distance, and that stale mix of detergent and burnt coffee hanging in the air. By 11:45 p.m., the aisles were empty. My coworker Sam was mopping near the front doors while I balanced my register. I was halfway through counting the bills when I heard the receipt printer click. Just one quick sound, like it was waking up. Then it started printing, slowly at first, then faster, spitting out paper in short bursts. The sound made me jump because my drawer was already closed, the system logged off. I looked at the screen, it was blank. The register wasn't even active. The receipt kept printing. I tore it off, expecting it to be some system error, maybe an automatic report. But when I looked at it, the top line made my stomach tighten. It said, "Return, Maria, 11:47 p.m. There was no item listed, no price, no barcode. Just that one word. I looked at Sam and said, "Did someone run a return?" He shook his head. "Nah, return's close at 10. I checked the other registers. All dark. The customer service desk lights were off. We were alone. I called the night manager, Denise, and told her what happened. She walked over, annoyed, thinking it was a glitch. But when I handed her the receipt, she frowned. "Who's Maria?" she asked. I didn't know. We didn't have anyone by that name on our team. Denise typed it into the employee system, but no active staff came up. Only one record, a cashier named Maria Lopez, who had worked there 5 years earlier. She'd died in a car accident on her way home from work. Denise went pale and crumpled the receipt in her hand. "Forget it," she muttered. "Just a printer error." She threw it away. But that night, the printer started again. Around 2 a.m., while the overnight stockers were in the back, I heard it click from across the store. I walked over. Another receipt was printing, line by line. Same word. Same name. Return, Maria, 2:03 a.m. I tore it off, feeling cold all over. I unplugged the machine, but it didn't stop. The sound kept going for a few seconds, as if the printer hadn't realized it was disconnected yet. When I picked up the paper, there was a faint brown stain on the corner, like dried coffee, but darker. The next day, I told Denise again. She didn't want to hear it. Said she'd call maintenance. But Sam later told me that Maria wasn't just any former employee. She'd died after working a double shift. She'd asked to leave early that night because she felt sick, but the manager at the time made her stay and finish her drawer. The last thing she did before leaving was print a return receipt. Someone had brought back a broken lamp. It was time-stamped 11:47 p.m. That detail made my blood run cold. The exact same time as the new receipt. For the next week, I switched to morning shifts. I didn't want to be there at night anymore. But one evening, Sam texted me, "She's back." He sent a photo, an empty register screen, glowing faintly blue, and next to it, a receipt printing by itself. When he tore it off, the paper was blank except for one word near the bottom, "Sorry." 2 nights later, I couldn't resist. I went back to the store around midnight, off the clock, just to see it for myself. Sam let me in through the employee entrance. Everything was quiet. The only light came from the register's standby glow. We stood there for a few minutes, waiting. Nothing. Then, right as the clock turned 11:47, the printer came to life. The sound was sharp and rhythmic. I leaned closer. The screen flickered, blank, then flashing the word return in faint text before turning off again. When the paper came out, I took it carefully. It said, "Return, Maria, thank you." No one spoke. Sam took a step back. "Maybe it's a pre-programmed test print," he said, though his voice shook. I didn't answer. Suddenly, the lights above us flickered, and a cold draft swept through the front lanes, even though the automatic doors were closed. I felt something brush past me, like someone moving quickly but unseen. The smell of perfume filled the air. Not strong, but distinct. Floral. Sweet. I turned, half expecting to see a customer. But there was no one. Just the sound of the receipt printer, still feeding blank paper, one slow inch at a time. When we checked the security footage later, we saw ourselves standing there. The printer started by itself, just like we remembered. But there was something else, a faint shadow between us. A woman-shaped outline, transparent but visible for a few frames, leaning slightly over the register, as if she were watching the receipt print. Her head was bowed. Then she was gone. After that night, the printer was replaced. The manager said the old one was too old to fix. But strange things didn't stop. The new printer would randomly power on at 11:47 every few nights, even with no one logged in. Employees began leaving notes near it, little messages on post-its that said things like "Rest now" or "Thank you, Maria." A few months later, I was working day shift again when an older woman came to my lane to return a small lamp. I scanned the barcode. It didn't register. I tried again. Nothing. She smiled gently and said, "That's all right, dear. It's been returned already." I looked up. Her eyes were soft and tired, her voice quiet. She placed a folded receipt on the counter and walked away before I could say anything. I opened it. The paper was yellowed and faded, but I could still read the words. "Return, Maria, 11:47 p.m. When I turned to call her back, she was gone. That night, I kept that old receipt in my locker, unsure why. For weeks, nothing happened. But one evening, when I opened my locker, it was gone. In its place was a small note, written in blue ink on register paper. It said simply, "No more returns. Thank you." Since that day, the printer has been silent. The air around the registers feels lighter, calmer, as if something that had been waiting for years finally got what it needed. Still, every night at 11:47, the security cameras near the front flicker for a second. And if you listen carefully, over the hum of the freezers and the distant buzz of the lights, you can almost hear the faint scratch of a receipt printing, just once, for old time's sake. The end. The voice in the toy aisle. It happened in Augusta, Georgia, in the fall of 2017. I was a night stalker at the Walmart on Wrightsboro Road. I'd been there for about 6 months, mostly working the toy section because no one else wanted it. During the day, it looked harmless, bright colors, cartoon faces, shelves full of stuffed animals. But at night, under the dim emergency lights, the whole section felt wrong. The silence there wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that pressed against your ears until you started to hear things that weren't there. The first time it happened was on a Wednesday, around 2:45 a.m. I was unpacking boxes of dolls when I heard something, soft laughter, like a child giggling from behind the shelves. I froze. There were no customers at that hour. Only 5 of us were working, and everyone else was on the far side of the store. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. I stepped around the corner of the aisle, shining my flashlight down the row. Nothing. Just a long stretch of toys staring back at me. I shrugged it off, thinking it was one of those talking dolls glitching in the box. But when I bent down to check the shelves, none of them were turned on. The batteries had been removed for shipping. The laughter came again, closer this time. I spun around. The sound was coming from the end of the aisle. It wasn't a toy's pre-recorded voice. It was different. More natural, but too slow, too drawn out, like someone trying to mimic a child's laugh. I radioed my coworker, Dean, and asked if he'd been in the toy section. He said no, he'd been restocking produce. I didn't tell him what I'd heard. I didn't want to sound crazy. The next night, I made sure to bring a portable speaker to play music quietly while I worked. It helped mask the silence. But around the same time, 2:45 a.m., the speaker cut out. Dead silence again. Then, from behind the shelf of board games, I heard a whisper. A single phrase. "Play with me." The voice was high-pitched but not robotic. It sounded real, like a small girl standing just a few feet away. The hair on my arms rose. I turned off my flashlight and listened. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then, again, the same phrase, this time from the opposite end of the aisle. "Play with me." I dropped the box I was holding and backed away. When I turned the corner, the motion sensor light flicked on by itself, even though I hadn't moved near it. That was enough for me. I went straight to Dean and told him something was wrong with the toys. He laughed at first until I told him exactly what I'd heard. His face went blank. "You're serious," he said. Then he admitted something. "You're not the first to hear that. The night crew before us talked about it too. Always in the same spot, the toy aisle near the dolls. We decided to check it out together. We walked back to the aisle. Everything was still. The shelves were lined perfectly. No batteries in the toys, no movement, nothing out of place. Then Dean noticed one doll, pink dress, blue eyes, sitting upright in the middle of the floor. He picked it up and frowned. "We don't sell this model anymore," he said. "They discontinued it years ago." I looked at the tag. It was faded and yellowed, the Walmart logo barely visible. Before we could say anything else, the doll's head turned slightly in Dean's hand. Its eyes blinked once, and in that same soft voice, it said, "Play with me." Dean dropped it. The sound echoed through the aisle. We ran straight to the front, breathless. The next morning, we told the manager, Carla. She didn't look surprised. "I've heard that story before," she said quietly. "It started after that little girl died in the parking lot. She ran off from her mom's cart and got hit by a truck near the loading dock. She was only 5. That night, I almost didn't come back. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted proof. Around 3 a.m., when the others were in the back, I went to the toy aisle with my phone camera on. Everything looked normal. I whispered, "Is anyone here?" The lights above flickered once. Then the same small voice answered, faint but clear. "Here." The doll section was empty. My camera caught the audio but no movement. Just shelves of plastic smiles staring back. Then, one by one, 3 dolls on the middle shelf started to fall forward, slowly, deliberately, like someone was brushing past them. I grabbed one and turned it over. No batteries. The battery slot was empty. I left the aisle shaking. When I checked the recording later, the voice was still there, clearer than before. But something about it was off. When I slowed it down, it didn't sound like a child. It was deeper, distorted, like an adult imitating a little girl. I showed the clip to Dean the next day. He didn't even finish listening. "Delete it," he said. "Don't keep that." A few weeks later, the store's power went out overnight. When it came back on, the toy section lights refused to turn on. The electrician said the fuse was fine. Still, that part of the store stayed dark for days. When the lights finally came back, the workers found all the dolls scattered across the floor, facing the same direction, toward the end of the aisle where the security camera hung. We checked the footage. At 2:46 a.m., every doll fell at once. No one was there. But in the last second of the clip, as the camera glitched, a shape appeared for just one frame, a small figure crouched in the aisle, hair covering her face. A few days later, Carla had the entire toy section moved to a different part of the store. She didn't give a reason. But the night crew knew. Since then, the voices stopped. Last month, I went back to visit Dean. He doesn't work there anymore either. We talked about that night, trying to laugh it off. But before I left, he told me something that made my skin crawl. The store replaced the old shelves in the toy section, he said. When they tore them out, they found something wedged behind the bottom panel. A doll. Same pink dress, same blue eyes. The maintenance guy said it looked melted, like it had been burned, then cooled again. He threw it away. But Dean's voice dropped lower. Next night, it was back on the shelf. He stared at me for a long time before saying, "They locked it in the back room now. You can still hear it sometimes. The motion sensor goes off, and the recording plays, 'Play with me.'" I don't know if he was telling the truth. I don't want to find out. But every time I pass a Walmart toy aisle, I still catch myself listening, just in case I hear that voice again, whispering from the end of the row. The end. The Vanishing Cashier. It happened in Henderson, Nevada, in the spring of 2014. I was driving cross-country and stopped at a Walmart just off the interstate to grab something to eat and stretch my legs. It was around 9:30 p.m., the kind of warm desert night when the air feels heavy and the parking lot glows orange under the sodium lamps. The store was quiet, only a few customers inside, and most of the employees looked like they were counting the minutes until closing. I remember everything clearly because of how ordinary it all seemed at first. I picked up a few snacks, a bottle of water, and a small flashlight. The line at the register was short, just one woman ahead of me and a cashier named Lydia, according to her name tag. She looked to be in her late 20s, with brown hair tied back and tired eyes that still managed a polite smile. When it was my turn, she scanned my items, and I noticed her hands trembling slightly. She kept glancing toward the side door that led to the employee area. I tried to make small talk, asked if it was always this quiet at night. She said softly, "Not always. Some nights are worse." I didn't understand what she meant, and before I could ask, the overhead lights flickered once. She froze, staring at the ceiling. Then, almost whispering, she said, "It happens around this time." I paid, thanked her, and left. Nothing strange yet. But when I looked at my receipt in the car, I noticed something odd. The date and time were correct, but where it usually listed the cashier's name, it said, "Lydia, closed account." I didn't think much of it until the next morning when I realized I'd left my flashlight at the register. I went back around 10 a.m., expecting to find the same woman. The store was busier, the sunlight harsh through the glass doors. I walked up to the same lane and asked the cashier if Lydia was working. She looked confused. "Who?" "Lydia," I repeated. "She was here last night. Brown hair, blue vest, lane 7. The cashier blinked. "No one by that name works here." I assumed maybe she was new or filling in from another store, so I asked to speak to a manager. The manager, a man named Curtis, came over and asked what was wrong. I explained everything, how Lydia had rung me up, how I had her name on my receipt. He took the paper, stared at it for a long time, then said quietly, "That's not possible." He told me there hadn't been anyone named Lydia working at that store for years. The last person with that name had gone missing on her way home from work. She'd closed the store one night and never made it home. Her car was later found abandoned a few miles away, keys still in the ignition. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. But Curtis didn't smile. He said, "You're not the first person to bring me a receipt like this." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way she'd looked at the lights, the way her voice trembled. I still had the receipt in my pocket. Around midnight, I unfolded it. The paper was warm to the touch, as if it had just come out of the printer again. The letters had faded slightly, and the name Lydia was now almost unreadable. I decided to go back the next evening to see for myself. The store was nearly empty again. A different cashier was working lane 7, so I walked up pretending to browse. At 9:31 p.m., the lights flickered once, exactly like before. The cashier frowned and said the power had been acting strange lately. I asked if anyone named Lydia had ever worked that shift. She froze, then said, "I've heard her name. The old-timers talk about her sometimes. They say she never really left." As she said it, the register screen glitched, numbers flashing rapidly before turning black. A faint buzzing filled the air. The lights flickered again, longer this time. Then, for a split second, I saw movement at the far end of the aisle, a woman standing near the customer service desk, wearing a Walmart vest, her head slightly tilted. The same hair. The same shape. When the lights came back, she was gone. I told the cashier what I'd seen. She looked pale. "That's her spot," she whispered. "People say she shows up when the power dips. Always near closing." The next morning, I called the corporate office to ask about her disappearance. They transferred me to the regional HR department. When I mentioned Lydia's name, there was silence on the line. Then the woman said, "Sir, we can't discuss former employees." "But, are you sure you saw her?" Her tone made me uneasy. 2 days later, I was driving through the area again at night and passed the store. The parking lot was empty except for one car, a dark blue Honda Civic, parked crookedly near the side entrance. The same model mentioned in the news article about Lydia's disappearance that I had found online earlier that day. The license plate matched too. I pulled over, heart racing, and stared at it. The car looked dusty, old, untouched for years. But as I watched, the brake lights flickered on for just a second, glowing red before going dark again. I drove off fast and didn't look back. A few weeks later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a receipt, crisp, white, new. The timestamp read 9:32 p.m., same store number, same lane. The cashier name field was blank. But at the bottom, in faint gray letters, there was a single message printed under the total. Thank you for shopping. Lydia. I never figured out who sent it or how they got my address. I threw it away, but sometimes I wish I hadn't. Last year, I stopped by that same Walmart again, just out of curiosity. The layout had changed, but the checkout lanes were still numbered the same. Lane 7 was empty, no lights, no cashier, no register. A small sign hung above it, temporarily out of service. The manager on duty said it had been that way for months. Every time they tried to replace the equipment, something went wrong. Power surges. Crashes. Once, a printer started running by itself and printed the same word over and over. Lydia. He said it like it meant nothing, but I could tell it unsettled him. As I left, the automatic doors opened, and for a moment, I caught my reflection in the glass, except there was someone standing behind me. A woman in a blue vest, smiling faintly, her eyes fixed on the receipt in my hand. When I turned around, no one was there. The end. The overnight stalker. It happened in Scranton, Pennsylvania, in November 2013. I was part of the night crew at the local Walmart, working 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shifts. There were only 5 of us on the overnight team, me, Daryl, 2 college kids, and our supervisor, Hank. The store stayed open 24 hours, but after midnight, it felt like another world. The air was colder, the music quieter, and the aisles stretched out like tunnels that seemed to never end. It started with something small. Boxes would appear half open when no one had touched them. Pallets would be moved a few feet overnight. We blamed it on the cleaning crew or the new guy, Ryan, who wasn't very organized. But Ryan swore he didn't move anything, and after a few nights, even Hank started to notice. One night around 2:30 a.m., Daryl and I were restocking paper towels when he stopped mid-step and said, "Did you see that?" I turned and caught a glimpse of someone walking down the next aisle, a man in a blue Walmart vest, head lowered, pushing a cart. That didn't seem strange until Daryl whispered, "That's the old uniform. They changed those 5 years ago." We followed the sound of the cartwheels, squeaky, uneven, echoing faintly through the store. We turned the corner, but the aisle was empty. The sound stopped. The only thing left was a single roll of paper towels lying on the floor, like it had just fallen off a shelf. We didn't talk about it for the rest of the shift. But the next morning, I asked Hank if anyone else worked the overnight shift with us. He said no, just the 5 of us. Then he frowned and added quietly, "You didn't see anyone else, did you?" That made my stomach tighten. I told him what we'd seen. Hank sighed and said, "There's been stories. Back before I got promoted, a guy named Leon worked nights here. Dropped dead right there in aisle 6, heart attack. He was stocking paper towels." He laughed nervously, trying to shake it off, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. A week later, I started hearing it again. Around the same time, 2:30 a.m., the squeak of cartwheels moving somewhere in the back aisles. It was slow, rhythmic, like someone pacing. Sometimes, when I'd round a corner, I'd catch a glimpse of a shadow moving just out of sight. Then came the night the power went out. It was around 3 a.m. The fluorescent lights flickered, then went black. The emergency generators kicked in, but only half the store lit up. The aisles beyond the freezer section were swallowed in darkness. Hank told us to stay where we were until maintenance fixed it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still moving around in the dark. I heard the faint sound of boxes sliding off a shelf. Then the squeak again, closer this time. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, landing on a cart halfway down the aisle. It was loaded with cleaning supplies, old packaging, and dust-covered stock that hadn't been touched in years. And standing behind it was a man. He wore a faded blue vest with a name tag that said Leon. His head was tilted slightly, and though his face was pale and hollow, his eyes were open, staring straight at me. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stood there, one hand resting on the handle of the cart. I called out, "Sir, are you okay?" He didn't answer. The power flickered back on for a second, flooding the aisle with light. In that flash, he was gone. The cart was still there, but it was empty. When the light stabilized, Hank came running over. I told him what I'd seen, but he didn't laugh this time. He just looked at the cart and said, "That's his." He explained that after Leon died, his cart was kept in storage for years before someone moved it to the back. He swore it had been thrown away months ago. But here it was, dust and all, exactly where we'd seen it. After that night, things got stranger. Pallets we'd unloaded would be fully stocked the next day with items no one remembered putting there, old brands, discontinued packaging. Once, I found a faded restock sheet with Leon's handwriting on it, dated from 2008. Daryl quit 2 weeks later after he heard someone whisper his name from an empty aisle. I stayed longer than I should have. Maybe I wanted to believe there was a logical explanation. One night, near the end of my shift, I was cleaning up the back aisle alone. It was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerators. Then I felt a sudden rush of cold air, like a door had opened behind me. I turned around, and there he was again, Leon, standing a few feet away, cart beside him. This time, he spoke. His voice was rough, weak. "Shift's not over yet." I dropped what I was holding and stumbled backward. The lights flickered again, and when they came back, he was gone. But the cart had moved closer, and on the shelf beside it, someone had placed a roll of paper towels, just one. That was my last night working there. I didn't even clock out. A few months later, I ran into Hank at a diner. He said they finally replaced all the night shift staff with day workers because too many people had quit. I asked if he'd ever seen Leon himself. He hesitated before answering. "Not since they removed the old carts," he said. "But sometimes, around 2:30, the scanner in aisle 6 turns on by itself. The screen flashes a name." I asked him what name. He looked down at his coffee and whispered, "Leon. I drove past that Walmart a few weeks ago out of curiosity. It's still open. The windows glow all night, bright as ever. But if you park across the street and watch long enough, around 2 or 3 in the morning, you might see it, just a shadow of a man pushing a cart through the aisles, restocking shelves that haven't needed restocking in years. He doesn't bother anyone. He doesn't talk. He's just finishing his shift." The end. Frozen section door. It happened in Wilmington, North Carolina, in February 2021. I was a part-time worker at the Walmart on Market Street, assigned mostly to the frozen food section. It wasn't a bad job, just repetitive, checking expiration dates, restocking shelves, making sure the freezer doors were spotless for the morning rush. But the night shift could feel eerie sometimes, especially around 2 or 3 a.m., when the building went quiet and the cold air from the freezers felt like it had a life of its own. The night everything happened started like any other. There were 4 of us working, me, my supervisor Carla, and 2 stockers, Ben and Alicia. Around 1:45 a.m., Carla asked me to reorganize the deep freezer section because a shipment had arrived late. I went into the walk-in freezer with my cart and scanner. The door was heavy, the kind that seals with a rubber edge to keep the cold in. I'd done this hundreds of times before. Inside, it was silent except for the low mechanical hum of the cooling system. The temperature read -10 degrees Fahrenheit. I pulled my jacket tighter and started stacking boxes of frozen vegetables. 10 minutes passed before I realized something was wrong. The air felt thicker, colder. My breath came out in white bursts, but it wasn't dispersing, it hung there, like smoke frozen in place. Then the light flickered once, dimmed, and steadied again. That wasn't unusual, the freezer light sometimes acted up. But when it flickered the second time, I heard it, a faint sound, like someone whispering from behind me. At first, I thought it was Ben or Alicia messing around. I turned and shouted, "Not funny." My voice echoed back at me, distorted by the metal walls. I went back to work, stacking another box, when the whisper came again, louder this time. It sounded like a man's voice, drawn out and slow. One word. Wait. I froze. My heart started to pound. I turned again, but no one was there. The aisle stretched straight back to the heavy door. Through the small window, I could see the faint glow of the store lights outside. I pushed my cart toward the door. That's when I heard the handle move. It clicked shut. I grabbed it immediately, yanked, and realized it wasn't budging. The latch had locked from the outside. Panic hit me fast. I started banging on the door, shouting Carla's name. My voice echoed back, muffled. The temperature gauge near the ceiling began to drop. -12 degrees, then -14 degrees. The air grew sharper, biting through my gloves. "Come on, open it!" I shouted, slamming my fist against the metal. Then, through the window, I saw movement. Someone was standing outside the door. A man, tall, wearing what looked like an old Walmart jacket, the kind from years ago with the red trim. He stood completely still, one hand on the glass. I couldn't make out his face clearly because of the frost building between us, but his outline was unmistakable. "Hey! Help me!" I yelled, banging harder. He didn't move. I wiped the frost from the window with my sleeve. The man was still there, but his features were wrong, blurred, like fog behind glass. And then he spoke. His lips didn't move, but I heard his voice inside the freezer, soft and distant, as if carried through the walls. "Not yet." The light flickered again, plunging the freezer into near darkness. I felt my legs go numb from the cold. I backed away from the door, grabbing one of the plastic crates to stand on, trying to stay calm. Every few seconds, I'd glance at the window, hoping Carla or Ben would appear, but the figure outside never left. He just stood there, breathing against the glass. After what felt like hours but couldn't have been more than minutes, I started to lose sensation in my fingers. I pressed my face to the window again, and this time, the man was gone. The hallway outside was empty. I slammed my shoulder against the door one last time, and suddenly it gave way. I stumbled out, gasping for air. Carla and Ben came running from the next aisle. "Where the hell were you?" Carla shouted. I tried to answer but my teeth were chattering too hard. "The door locked," I stammered. "Someone was out there." Ben looked confused. "We were all in produce," he said. "No one came near the freezer." I pointed at the window. Frost still clung to the glass, and where the man's hand had been, there was a faint print, long, narrow fingers, outlined in ice. Carla called maintenance the next day to inspect the latch. The mechanic said the door was in perfect working order. "These locks are magnetic," he said. "They can't jam unless someone's holding them from the outside." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what the man had said, "Not yet." It played in my head over and over. A week later, the same freezer malfunctioned again. This time, no one was inside, but when the night crew checked the temperature log the next morning, they saw something strange. The digital record showed a sudden drop to -30 degrees at exactly 3 a.m. for 10 minutes, then a return to normal. The security camera covering that section glitched during the same window of time. When maintenance reviewed the footage, all they saw was a brief flash of static, and then, for 1 second, a man standing by the freezer door. His outline was faint, but his old Walmart vest was clearly visible. No one claimed to recognize him, but one of the older employees, Mark, spoke up quietly. "That looks like George," he said. "He worked here before the remodel." When asked what happened to George, Mark hesitated before saying, "He died in that freezer. Heart failure." They found him the next morning. The door had jammed. Carla went pale. She asked Mark when that had been. He said, "Winter of 2011. 10 years to the week before the night I got locked inside. Since then, no one goes into that freezer alone anymore. The company installed a new safety latch and cameras, but people still say the temperature dips every night at exactly 3 a.m. for a few seconds. Alicia told me once that when she walks by the door during that time, she sometimes sees a shape behind the glass. A man's silhouette, standing still, hand pressed against the window. She swears she's heard him whisper the same words I did. Not yet. The end. The last customer before closing. It happened in Tucson, Arizona, in September 2022. I was working the late shift at the Walmart on Valencia Road. The store closed at midnight, and I was one of the few cashiers still on duty. It had been a long, slow night, just the sound of the registers, the faint hum of the ceiling lights, and the occasional voice on the intercom announcing we'd be closing soon. It was 11:56 p.m. when the doors slid open again. I remember it clearly because I was about to turn off my lane light. A man walked in, tall, pale, wearing an old gray jacket. He looked out of place, like he'd been walking for hours. His clothes were damp, shoes covered in dust, and his eyes. I don't know how to describe them. They looked empty, like he was awake but not really there. He didn't grab a cart or a basket. He just walked slowly through the aisles, staring at everything like he didn't recognize what he was seeing. I thought maybe he was homeless, or lost, or high. Still, something about him made me uneasy. At 11:59, he came toward my lane with a completely empty cart. He pushed it quietly, his steps heavy on the tile. I asked, "Find everything okay?" He looked at me for a long moment before saying softly, "I don't need anything. Just wanted to come inside." Before I could respond, the lights flickered, the kind of flicker that feels like a breath being sucked out of the room. The intercom went silent mid-sentence. Then, for just a few seconds, everything stopped. No hum, no air conditioning, nothing. The man stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on me. When the lights came back, he was gone. The cart was still there, but he wasn't. I looked around, thinking maybe he'd walked away or left quickly, but the automatic doors hadn't opened. Security cameras didn't beep either. I radioed my supervisor, Kenny, and asked if he'd seen the customer leave. "What customer?" he asked. I told him about the man in the gray jacket. Kenny came to the front, checked the footage, and froze. He replayed the clip from 11:56 to 12:02. The video showed the doors sliding open, but no one walking in. The cart just rolled in by itself. I felt a chill run down my back. "Maybe the system glitched," I said, but my voice was shaking. Kenny didn't answer. He was staring at the screen, zooming in on the timestamp. The cart had entered the frame, stopped at lane 5, mine, and then started turning slowly toward the register, just like someone was pushing it. But there was no one behind it. After that night, strange things kept happening around closing. The motion sensors near the entrance would trigger for no reason. The cameras would freeze at exactly midnight, sometimes showing static, sometimes showing faint shadows moving through the aisles. Once, the store's door alarm went off, but when security checked the footage, the doors had never opened. A week later, the same thing happened again. 11:55 p.m., nearly closing. A single cart rolled from the entrance to my register, silent, steady, empty. I was alone at the front. The doors were locked this time. I stood frozen, staring at it. The cart stopped right in front of me. That's when I noticed something. The seat area, the spot where kids usually sit, was wet, like someone had spilled water or melted ice. But when I touched it, it wasn't cold. It was warm. I backed away, heart pounding. The air around me grew heavier, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in seconds. Then I heard a faint voice behind me. A man's voice, quiet, almost calm. "Thanks for letting me in." I turned, but there was no one there. The air smelled faintly of rain and gasoline, like an engine still running. Kenny came running when I screamed. He saw the cart, saw the puddle, but when I told him about the voice, he just shook his head. "You need to go home," he said. "Get some sleep." The next morning, I came back to find the managers huddled around the computer in the security office. They were watching the overnight footage. I peeked at the screen. The timestamp was 12:01 a.m. The camera above lane 5 showed the cart rolling on its own. And then, clear as day, a figure appeared for one frame. A man, standing behind the cart, wearing a gray jacket, face pale and expressionless. One of the older managers, Linda, whispered, "That's him." I asked what she meant. She looked at me and said, "A man died right outside this store 5 years ago. Car crash, just before midnight. He was on his way home. They say he was heading here to grab something for his wife." I didn't want to believe it. I told myself maybe it was just coincidence. But later that week, one of the overnight stalkers found a small plastic bag on the floor near the entrance. Inside was a receipt. No items listed, just a date and time, September 18th, 2017, 11:59 p.m., and at the bottom, a handwritten note, "She's still waiting." Kenny called the police to make sure it wasn't some prank, but the receipt number matched one from that same date. The cashier ID? Lane 5. That night, no one wanted to close. We finished early, locked up fast, and waited outside for the manager to shut off the lights. As we stood in the parking lot, the automatic doors opened by themselves. Just once. A faint light flickered inside, and for a split second, we all saw him, standing in the doorway, hands on the cart handle, looking out toward the parking lot like he was searching for someone. Then the doors slid shut again. The next day, the morning crew found wet footprints leading from the entrance to lane 5, stopping right where I had been standing that night. They checked the cameras again, but the footage was gone. Corrupted. Only the timestamp remained, 12 hours. I quit the next week. I couldn't stand being there after dark. Kenny stayed on a little longer, but a few months later, he left too. He told me that sometimes, when the store is empty and the lights dim for closing, he still hears the sound of a cart rolling slowly down the front aisle. No footsteps. Just wheels. And every once in a while, the registers print a blank receipt at exactly midnight. At the bottom, faint but visible, the same words appear. "Thanks for letting me in." The end.